Hey guys, how's it going? B-Dog here, coming at you with a nice Resident Evil Village review. Hopefully you guys are having a good one and all that jazz. For this Resident Evil Village review, we are going to cover the rating of the game that I will give it, the story, the gameplay, the good and the bad of the game, the length of the game, and should you buy it. Now, one thing I will say about this review is we are just going to strictly focus on the main game of Resident Evil Village, so we're not going to be including DLC or anything like that. Now that we've went over what we will be covering in this review, let's go ahead and cover the rating of the game. I personally would give Resident Evil 8 a 10 out of 10, and the reason why I would say it is a 10 out of 10, at least in my opinion, is because the story and the gameplay are absolutely phenomenal. I can honestly say that this is my favorite game of all time, and out of all of the Resident Evil games, I can say hands down this is the best Resident Evil game I have played. Resident Evil will give you really good gameplay, and again, the story is absolutely amazing. Now that I've kind of given you some quick reasons why I believe it's a 10 out of 10, let's go a little bit more in depth and go over the story. The story of Resident Evil 8 is absolutely phenomenal. Now, I know I've been going really hard for this story, but in my opinion, it's just simply amazing. One thing I will say really quickly before we get into a bit of the story is obviously this is going to tie in with Resident Evil 7. So if you can, make sure that you play Resident Evil 7 before you play 8. That way you can kind of understand more of what's going on. The biggest reason why this is important is because you are going to want to know a little bit more about the events that happened with Mia, Ethan, and Chris Redfield. Now, I'm not going to go too terribly deep in depth with the story because I don't want to spoil the story or anything like that, but I do kind of want to go over some quick things with the story. So in Resident Evil 8, you are going to be taking the role of Ethan Winters most of the game, and the game is picking up 3 years after the events that happened in Resident Evil 7. In Resident Evil 8, Ethan and Mia have been moved to Europe by Chris Redfield, and during this time Ethan and Mia have a daughter named Rose. One thing I will say is Chris Redfield is going to have a massive part of the story, even though you will be mostly playing as Ethan Winters. So just to kind of quickly go over what the premise of the story is, Rose gets abducted and Ethan has to find his daughter in this creepy village. This story is going to take you on a massive roller coaster, and everything is not as it seems, and everything will make sense at the end of the game, and it will kind of come full circle. Now that we've got the story out of the way, let's go ahead and cover the gameplay of Resident Evil 8. I would say that the gameplay of Resident Evil 8 is absolutely amazing, and overall is just a really good time. I'm going to go ahead and cover some topics on the gameplay aspects of this game, and some really good changes that were made to Resident Evil 8. I personally think that the combat in Resident Evil 8 are way better and way more satisfying than it was in Resident Evil 7. Now, not to say that the combat in Resident Evil 7 was bad by any means, but it was way more reliant on stealth and trying to avoid combat unless it was absolutely necessary. Whereas in Resident Evil 8, you are going to be in quite a bit of combat, especially whenever you are fighting your way to the bosses. The reason why I feel the combat is way more satisfying in Resident Evil 8 is because most of the time whenever you are going against zombies or Lycans, usually there's a group of them and it feels so satisfying to fight them off. I think another aspect that we need to quickly go over in Resident Evil 8, of course, are the scares. There definitely are some good scares with Resident Evil 8, but at least in my opinion, I found that the scares in Resident Evil 7 were better. We are definitely going to go a little bit more in depth with this whenever we cover the good and bad of Resident Evil 8. But since we are on the topic of the scares, I'm going to kind of just give you an idea of what to expect. So as you progress through the game and you go to a specific area that belongs to one of the bosses, they will typically have their own flavor of horror for Ethan. Now this can be a variety of things, like for example, there's going to be one boss that is going to hunt down Ethan as he's just traversing the area, and then there's going to be another one that has some psychological elements where Ethan has hallucinations. So like I said, out of the 4 bosses that you will face, They're each going to have their own specific thing, but this is something small and we'll go a little more in depth with this, like I said, with the good and bad of Resident Evil 8. Another really good thing whenever it comes to the gameplay of Resident Evil 8 is honestly the exploration. I think the exploration in Resident Evil 8 is really good and you have a lot of exploring to do. Not only do you have the main village, but you also have the boss specific areas to explore as well. So if you're someone who enjoys finding all of the secrets of the game and trying to collect every last item, you will have a blast. And if you are someone who doesn't really care for exploration and you're just trying to experience the story, the exploration is still really good because it doesn't feel like a walking simulator where you have that feeling like, oh my god, is it over yet? So you'll always kind of have stuff to do, whether it be looking for clues or finding keys. The exploration is really good. Another really good thing that they added in Resident Evil 8 was Duke the Merchant. If you have played Resident Evil 4 before, it kind of works the same exact way, but if you've never played a Resident Evil 4 or you don't know how the merchant system works, allow me to explain. So at every save point, you're going to run into this handsome bastard known as Duke. This is how you are going to upgrade your weapons, buy your weapons, and just buy general supplies that you will need. And of course, you can sell stuff to the Duke, like treasures and things that you find. Now, one really cool feature that is really cool with Duke is something called Duke's Kitchen. Duke's Kitchen will allow you to cook food that will give you permanent buffs for the rest of the game. So let's say you hunt some fish or some chicken and you bring it back to Duke, he will cook it and you will get a permanent buff, like increases health slightly permanently, and not to mention there are many more effects that you can get as well, provided you have the materials to cook the food. I personally found this feature really cool, and it can actually make Ethan pretty strong as the game continues. The last thing that I want to quickly go over are the puzzles of Resident Evil 8. Now, I know that this is a very small thing, but I like to kind of give you an idea of what kind of puzzles to expect whenever you are playing the game. So unlike Resident Evil 7, you will not be trying to use a statue to make a shape in a painting. In Resident Evil 8, a lot of your puzzles will be stuff like trying to figure out patterns and solving riddles and things like that. It's not too terribly hard, but I just kind of wanted to give you a heads up on what to expect in Resident Evil 8 as far as the puzzles go. Now let's go ahead and cover the positives and the negatives of Resident Evil 8. So to be honest, really the only negative I have to say about this game are the scares. Now whenever I say this, I don't want you to think that this game is not scary, but most of the scares are going to take place whenever you are trying to get to the bosses of the game. Of course, you will still have jump scares and things like that as you are traversing the village, but I wouldn't say it's as scary as Resident Evil, but the positives definitely outweigh the slight negative, and really, it's not even that big of a negative, it's just me nitpicking. Now, with the one negative out of the way, let's go ahead and cover some of the positives of Resident Evil 8. I think one of the biggest positives that happened in this game is the evolution of Ethan and the evolution of Ethan's story. If you haven't seen my Resident Evil 7 review, one of my biggest complaints was how bland Ethan was, but in Resident Evil 8, they actually gave him much more personality, and you get really attached to him as a character, and they did a phenomenal job with his character development, in my opinion. I think a huge positive of this game is the story and how in-depth it actually gets. Now, like I said towards the beginning of the video, the story is absolutely fucking amazing in my opinion. I'm not gonna lie, I always tear up at the end of the story, and it's just very well put together as a whole. Another quick thing that I want to say in regards to the story is you can find so much lore and just really cool tidbits of information about the village and the people of the village as well. And of course, you can find all of this information whenever you are exploring and looking through, notes that people have left behind or books as well. Another huge positive that I want to cover is the combat. I know I briefly covered this whenever I was covering the gameplay, but the combat, in my opinion, is so fun and so satisfying. Whether you are fighting zombies, lycans, or the bosses, you are going to have a really fun time, and you are just going to have a blast shooting your way to get to the boss. I feel that another huge positive of this game is the atmosphere and the environment. Whether you are traversing through the village or you are fighting your way to get to the boss, the atmosphere and the sounds are absolutely amazing. Just to give you an example of what I mean, if you are traversing through the village, you can hear the lichen growling at you in the village where everyone seems to be dead. It's just a very eerie atmosphere, and it kind of just feels like at any point in time something could just jump out and attack you, or you could be attacked by a mob of lichens. I would recommend, if you do play this, try to play with a headset if you can, because it will set you up for a much more spookier experience. You will also run into some areas that are just downright creepy and very unnerving. Now, I wouldn't say that this is the same type of atmosphere that you would get in Resident Evil 7 in terms of everything looking like a slaughterhouse, but like I said, you will definitely have a lot of creepy areas and just areas that are just unnerving, especially whenever you are fighting your way to the boss. Obviously, there are way more positives than I listed, but I just wanted to kind of highlight the good and the bad of Resident Evil Village. Now let's go ahead and cover the length of Resident Evil Village. I would say the length of the game is roughly about 10 to 11 hours, give or take. Obviously, this is going to be completely subjective, and of course, everyone is going to be a little bit different. In this particular playthrough that you are seeing, I finished the game in about 8 hours and 41 minutes on the standard difficulty. I really wasn't searching for all of the items and all of the pieces of lore because I've played this game a lot and I've beaten it a few times. But I would say if you're looking for all of the lore, all of the items, or you're playing on a higher difficulty, it's probably going to take you a bit longer, but I would say roughly about 10 to 11 hours is going to be a standard playthrough. The last topic that we are going to cover is, should you buy Resident Evil Village? I would say 110% yes. If you are a fan of a really good story, really good gameplay, as well as some nice scares, Resident Evil Village is definitely for you. Alright guys, we have reached the end of this Resident Evil Village review. Thank you guys so much for coming out. It means the absolute world to me. But if you are brand new, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I would appreciate it. But I do hope that you have a great rest of your day, and we'll catch you on the next one, guys. Have a good one.